was in the Army for 3 years. I retired as a lieutenant colonel. Graduated from high school in 1966 in Southern California. Wild and crazy place in 1966, and my parents had maybe a couple years prior to that been divorced. I wouldn't get a lot of parental oversight. Basically partied my way out of a college deferment and had a very low draft number, so I did well in all the testing at the induction center and qualified to go to what they called warrant officer flight training. Started flight school in early 1968, graduated in October 68 and went straight to Vietnam. Vietnam basically was the helicopter war. I started out, first tour, 20 years old, as flying a Huey, and that was the first assignment, and certainly the most exciting. That's the one where I really received all of the awards and decorations for valor. That was the assignment in which I was wounded. When you think in terms of some of the things that I personally experienced, when I get reflective, I kind of think in terms of the word miracle, and here I am today. What I experienced in Vietnam, probably, I was for the most part a young heathen when I went over there, and by the time you come home after some of the things I experienced, I started to get more in the religious path, thinking that maybe there's something God wants me to be doing. Now here I am 40 years later, and I'm ordained. One of my most harrowing experiences in Vietnam, in fact, it was the day I was wounded, my co-pilot never flew again. I think the first variable that I would apply that certainly helped me get over any of the rough bumps was a wife, a woman I really loved and was very supportive and patient. And certainly the other was my faith life. I have talked to some of the youth at the church periodically about subjects like discernment of where you're going in your life and being able to maybe surrender a little bit to a higher power. If you're not willing to do that, if you're the kind of person that feels like you're totally in charge of everything you do in every minute of your life, you're going to have problems.
Mark Sullivan. I retired back in 2013. Really, I got conditioned early on in my career. Okay, so I was commissioned a second lieutenant back at Jacksonville State University back in 1988, and within 2 years found myself deployed to Kuwait and subsequently into Iraq. Fast forward about 13 years to 2003, I was involved in Operation Iraqi Freedom 1, which was the initial assault to Baghdad. So we were involved in 26 days of sustained combat with the 3rd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division. Again, in 2005, went over and worked the elections for Iraq as we tried to create some democratic processes. And then back in 2007, again, for the surge. And then finally back in 2011 when we actually closed the mission down in Iraq. I've got a wonderful wife, 6 children, and they've really had to endure more, I think, than I have in terms of going overseas and doing what I've been trained to do. Spouses are not trained to stay home by themselves and raise a family. It's an amazing family network, back home when soldiers are deployed, where families take care of each other, help and drive to doctor, whatever it takes to get the task done at home. So it's pretty amazing. It's a complete turnaround from, let's say 40 or 50 years ago. There was one trip back from Iraq, it might have been Desert Storm, where every exit, the overpasses on each of the exits were just cram-packed with people from the community for about 10 miles, just getting back on a base. So we flew into Atlanta, I think, and took buses from Atlanta back to Fort Benning, Georgia, in Columbus, and it was lined, for the last 10 or 15 miles back, so it's pretty impressive. It's an honorable profession. It's the most respected public service job, if you will. I never intended to stay beyond my initial enlistment. And then for the next 24 years, I tried like heck to stay in the Army, you know, because I just, you know, something snapped and it just became a reality that what I was doing was really important. It was a privilege for all 27 years to serve. And I had great teammates, and so, you know, when that happens, when you have teammates you can trust and you're trained and you're ready to go, it makes it easy. It's an incredible honor, okay? So I'm privileged to be, I think, associated with such a class, you know, of individuals, right? But, you know, you also got to understand that we don't do what we do and expect any recognition at all. So we deploy, we come back, you know, we just do what we signed up to do, and that's it. So although I'm very honored to accept this induction, you know, it's not what I envisioned, you know, when I signed up, and it's not what I expected as I served in the military.
Bernard Parr, but everybody called him Bernie. He was Army. He retired as a major. He was an aviator through and through. He loved flying. He loved flying. Loved it. That's all he wanted to do. It was his first tour in Vietnam when he got the Distinguished Flying Cross. He test flew the helicopters and he flew missions as well, but he was basically the maintenance officer. They didn't have enough aircraft for the mission for the next day, and there's this firefight, but he went out there, and as the guys were trying to fix the helicopters, and he was as well, but he picked those birds up, he test flew those helicopters in the area, the small area that they had available to them while incoming is happening. And that's why he got the Distinguished Flying Cross. My husband will tell you that he was the cockiest 19-year-old ever existed. And it was only surpassed by the rest of the helicopter pilots who felt they were, you know, just the be-all and end-all. But they kind of had to be, to do what they did. Bernie in particular, his greatest satisfaction when he was in Vietnam was being able to go get the troops when they had nobody else. If you needed something fixed, Bernie was the go-to guy. Bernie had the tool. Bernie would figure out how to do it. The North Alabama chapter of the Vietnam helicopter pilots became aware of an old helicopter, old Huey, that the museum had acquired. And Bernie decided that these bunch of old guys, just with their tools in their garage, could fix this helicopter and make it presentable. And by God, they did. He was the instigator of that. Vietnam helicopter pilots have a reunion every year, and Bernie never wanted to go. But one year, and I believe it was 1999, it was held up in Nashville, and so after much cajoling, he went. What was so amazing is these guys, when they get together, they talk. Very cathartic for them, and they talk about all their different experiences. And I remember in Nashville, because this was our very first one, and around the perimeter are the wives and the daughters and the sons, and we're just listening. And it's like, oh my gosh, we had no idea what they had really been through. He passed away the end of January, exactly 1 month after our 50th wedding anniversary. He was determined, bless his heart, he was determined that we were going to get through that. He had a bucket list, and by God, he did them. He did. He would think this was silly. He would say, "What's all the fuss about?" I didn't do anything special. There are other people who did more than I did. He was never one to brag on himself. He was quite content to be in the background, but just to make sure things got done. Oh my gosh, my kids are so excited. My children are so excited. They are just thrilled beyond words. They are just so proud of their dad, so proud of him.
My name is Don Harp, U.S. Army, and I was a Chief Warrant Officer, 4th class, when I retired both times. I came in 1968. I was a high school to flight school. I went straight to basic training to flight school to Vietnam. And I flew a nice 12 months over there. Got a few medals, and got shot down a couple of times, got wounded once. And then I came back to the United States, and I instructed Vietnamese how to fly for a couple of years, and I went to Korea. I basically spent 21 years in. I flew OH-6s as a scout pilot in Vietnam, then I flew UH-1s as a command and control pilot, and then I came back and was an instructor in UH-1s for several years, and then I got into Chinooks. I flew Chinooks most of my tour. And then I retired again, and then this little war they've got going on still came about, and they called me on the phone and said, "We'd love for you to come back because we're out of Chinook instructor pilots, and we really need you to come back in and teach." So I came back in and taught for another 5 years. Well, I had to be crazy, but other than that, I can't think of anything else that's special about them. They like to tell war stories. They have a tendency to have a little bit too much fun sometimes, but they're pretty good at what they do. Well, having survived coming home from Vietnam is wonderful. I get to see a whole lot of troops in my line of work, and they're better received now than they have ever been. So it's good. I have 3 granddaughters. Anyway, it's for them.
My husband was in the military, so Mike was what they call a military brat, and we arrived at Redstone Arsenal in 1978. All his life he was very active in sports. He was on the soccer team and the golf team at Butler. During high school, Mike worked at the Redstone golf course, and there were many men there that were graduates of West Point. And so they kept telling him he should apply. And he received a presidential appointment to West Point. He was coming home from work, and he saw all these people standing along the road, and he stopped, and he saw a van that was overturned and it was on fire. He was able to pull a man out of the van and wrap him in his BDU dress shirt and perform medical procedures on him until the medics arrived. Mike did not tell his company, but some German citizens came to the post looking for him and wanted to thank him. And that was how they found out about this. The boys were 5 and 7, and they were interested in skiing, and they joined the ski club. Over Veterans Day, they went with the ski club on a ski trip. And they were taking a train. It was a glacier. They had the option of taking a train up to the top, and that caught fire, and sadly that ended their lives. At the Veterans Memorial, I have a bench in memory of both my husband and my son. After the accident, several people said, what can we do? He's buried at West Point, so there's nothing here. Many of our friends and family donated to a fund, and so we have a flag and flagpole, and then a stone memorial below it at the Redstone Golf Course. I'm very proud of him, Michael.
Gary Michael Rose. In 1967, I was living in a draft board, North Hollywood. In that part where I was, there were very few young men of draftable age. It looked like I was going to be drafted. In those days, they were drafting in the Navy, Marine Corps, and the Army. He highly recommended I don't be drafted in the Marine Corps. He said, if you want to join, that's one thing, but don't get drafted. Well, I have no use for salt water. No offense to the Navy, it's a great service. But I looked at the other service, which was the Army, and the options the Army had at the time, it was more akin to what I wanted. So if you're going to join, you might as well make your own decisions as first to have somebody tell you. So I came in as airborne infantry. I spent about 6 months in the 7th, went to the 46th Company in Thailand. From there I went to Mac Song, Vietnam, and afterwards I came home and I married Margaret. We went to Panama, and from Panama I went to OCS, and from OCS I had various artillery assignments throughout, from Korea to Germany. We were out of ammunition. We were drinking iodine-flavored brown water that was crunchy. Now you'd take a swig and you'd have to just hope that what you were spitting out wasn't something that moved on its own. We thought that the 14th of September, we thought that was our last day. And I credit the support we got to a gentleman by the name of Colonel John Sadler. But without that man pressuring for the aircraft and everything, we would have been toast. In fact, we've been told that they didn't really think we were getting out anyway. Every day after September 14th, 1970, I personally think is gravy. When I was recognized by General Abrams with the Distinguished Service Cross for this action, I felt I was way over-recognized back then. And jump ahead 46, 47 years, it still kind of bewilders me because I still think that I'm over-recognized for what I did in those 4 days. And the reason I say that is because as I remember the courage and the valor of the guys that were with me, any one of those gentlemen could have been picked for this award, in my opinion. It's broader than just the guys I was on the ground with. The Marine aviators, without them, I've been told, this is years later, that when those Cobra pilots were returning to refuel, go to the bathroom, get a sandwich and a cup of coffee while their aircraft was being refueled and rearmed, the ground crews were taking 100-mile-an-hour tape and covering up all the holes and spray painting them so that when the pilots returned to the aircraft, they didn't see that their aircraft, they were basically flying a cheese grater at that rate with the amount of holes in them. And these crews kept coming back and back, and they were both Marines, and then the fighter pilots We lost a family member to, very close family member to PTSD. If you think you need help, get help. If you know somebody that you think needs help, force the issue, push and shove if you have to. Jump up and down and scream until somebody listens to you and get that person help.